First, a little disclaimer. I've been traveling for about a week and a half now, and I started with the American version of the code. And I think I've picked up different versions through the countries that I've been through. So if I happen to lose my voice halfway through the talk, it's normal. So you're going to have to excuse me about that. So let's just go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about interoperability with PDF files. And I've put together a little example of what could go wrong with your PDF file. So this file might look perfectly fine on your end. When you send it to your customer, it might look something like this, where our logo is a black box and obviously the text isn't quite right. Or it can look something like this, where the logo is in a semi-inverse color, not exactly inverse, not exactly right either. The microphone? Is that better?
No, they're turned on.
All right. Let's see where the button is. Dietrich probably knows.
He's recording it, that's why.
Oh, yeah. How about now? How about now? Yep, better. All right, so this is another problem that we can see here where the logo isn't quite right. The text is correct, but the logo is not. So at the end of this talk, we're actually going to be able to figure out what exactly happened here, why the logo doesn't show up correctly, and why the text didn't show up correctly a little bit ago, and now it's obviously fine. So this is what the presentation is supposed to look like. The logo is supposed to be this blue color with these orange dots and a white D. So my name is Vel Genov. I'm the Senior Product Manager for the PDF product line at Datalogix. So if you have any questions about our roadmap, about the future of the products, about where things are going, anything else that you've seen in the marketplace, any interesting stuff, you can talk to me about it. I usually talk to a lot of customers, so I do know what's going on most of the time, and you can reach out to me. First, a little bit about Datalogix and who are we. We've been around for 51 years, so we're established in 1967. I wasn't around at that time. I've been around for just 8 years at Datalogix, and I started in our support department, then I went through our engineering department. So I've been in a lot of different parts of the workflow of Datalogix. We're located in Chicago. The weather is as bad as you hear it is. I think it was winter yesterday. Today it's summer. Tomorrow I'm not sure what it's going to be like. It's nice to visit in the summer, which is July, pretty much. And that's about it. So you're welcome to stop by and say hi. We've been providing the Adobe Pdf Toolkits to developers since 1997. So that's when we started providing the Adobe PDF library, and we currently port it to 14 platforms, which I will not list, because I cannot remember all of them at the same time. We also develop .NET and Java interfaces for those, for the Adobe PDF library. We're active in the community. We have a blog. We are on Stack Overflow. We're on the Adobe forum, so you can find us in a lot of different places. And our Chief Product Officer, Matt Kuznicki, is also the chairman of the PDF Association. Some of you might have met him. So let's get right into it. You all know the PDF format. I'm just going to do a very quick talk on it. So the PDF format is very vast. It's very rich. It's an open format. It's an ISO standard. A lot of you know that. And its core brand promise is that your files are going to look the same throughout the whole workflow. And I'm here to talk about that particular brand promise and how that can be broken, which is obviously a problem. So there's a lot of different tools out there. If you do a simple Google search, you're going to come up with a lot more than 100. I don't actually know how many different PDF tools are out there. A lot of them are written from scratch. Some of you may have written a PDF tool, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And naturally, there will be actually variations in those tools in the way they process PDF files. So as a result, technically valid PDFs may appear differently across different platforms, across different tools. As I mentioned, at Datalogix, we work with the PDF library. We've been working with it for a very long time. We get to talk to a lot of different customers and see pretty much a lot of different problems. So we've been doing some research over the years, and we've used that to put together 6 areas roughly where we most commonly see some interoperability issues. And these are really the areas that we've identified. So we've used various test files. We used the Gantt test suite, the Altona test suite, customer files that I unfortunately cannot show you. Others, we've used other files. We manufacture files internally to see how they perform across the board. We basically do a lot of different tests. So the top row is something that I'm going to touch on in detail later. The bottom row, unfortunately, didn't make the cut. So I'm going to go over each one of them right now. So color variations. That's an important one. So PDF files, as you know, can have a lot of different color spaces. Each image can be in its own color space, which gives the file format great flexibility, but it can also be a source of problems. So monitors process RGB files very well. Print works with CMYK. So if you distribute your PDF files in CMYK to people that are going to view them on monitors, then there needs to be some color conversion that happens behind the scenes. Fortunately, color conversion is a very complex process, and it might not always appear correctly. So the colors might appear washed out, or they might be too vibrant, or they might just be different, which in some cases is not a problem. In other cases, it's actually a very big problem. Overprint issues. So overprint happens when inks are laid on top of each other. So overprint pretty much defines the way inks are going to interact, which is obviously very important for print. So now imagine that your PDF processing engine has to be able to figure out how these inks are going to interact and then display that on a monitor. So this is a fairly complex issue. Obviously, different processors have a different opinion of how colors are going to interact, and that's where this interoperability comes from. So if a PDF file has overprint in it, it might appear different on different viewers and different tools, which is obviously a problem. The last one, annotation appearances, and this is a common one that we see fairly frequently. So in the PDF file, whenever you create annotations, that actually goes for forms as well, there needs to be an appearance stream behind them, and that appearance stream is going to tell the viewer what those annotations are going to look like when it processes them. Well, in the PDF specification version 1.7, annotation appearances are not required. So sometimes when viewers create annotations, they're actually not going to put that appearance behind them. So it's up to the viewer that processes them to figure out what they're going to look like. So that's why annotations might look different on different viewers, because it's really up to the viewer what that annotation is going to look like. Whether that pop-up is actually going to pop up, we don't actually know. So it's a big problem. It's one that I've run into personally with some of the viewers that I use. Once I received an annotated file, the viewer didn't tell me that file was annotated, so I didn't know that there were actually edits that I was supposed to make because nobody bothered telling me. So that's a problem. It's a big problem, and again, it really depends on how the tools behind those documents are built. So let's dive right into the first one up there on the top, and that's commonly unsupported image types. And that's one of my favorite ones. And here I'm actually going to dive a little bit into 16-bit images. So you're going to hear about JPEG 2 and JPEG 2000 first. So they're fairly common file formats. Wikipedia tells me JPEG 2000 is the successor to JPEG. Not sure about that, because I don't see it way that often, so I don't really think it took off. But it's still valid in PDF, and it's still used sometimes, although not very well supported. So with JPEG 2000 images, they might not appear at all, or they might appear wrong if you use them in your files. Same goes for JPEG 2. It's a lossless compression for bi-level images. And again, they might not be processed correctly if you have some JPEG 2 images. So you can do yourself a favor and use some more common image file formats in your documents if you're actually distributing those externally. So 16-bit images, and that's actually an interesting one, and I'm happy that it actually shows the difference very well on this screen. sorta. I don't know if you can see them, but we have an 8-bit image and we have a 16-bit image. The 8-bit one is the one with the lines, and the 16-bit one is the one that looks smoother. Now, these are not to be confused with what I have seen in the 90s, and those are 16 color images, and I still remember when we transferred from 16 color images to 256 color images, and that was very, very cool. I'm sure a lot of you remember that. But that's not it. These are actually 8-bit per channel images and 16 bits per channel images. So in the 8-bit per channel images, there's 256 tone variations for each channel. So for RGB color, that would be 256 for red, green, and blue, and for CMYK you got 4 separate ones. So you can see that that's actually a pretty big difference, since in the 16-bit images you have 65,000 different tonal variations. So, go ahead.
You have up there a wider color gamut. 16 bits per channel doesn't give you a wider gamut, it gives you more gradations. It's a totally separate dimension.
Okay, that's a good point. It's a good point. And the bottom line is that 16-bit images are going to look smoother. So those are fairly commonly used by photographers for pictures, because then the gradients are actually a lot smoother. As you can see here, the transition between the 8-bit per channel and the 16-bit per channel, the transitions are very visible in the 8-bit one. The transitions in the 16-bit one are not that visible. Go ahead, Al.
What it does give you is high dynamic range capability. The fact you have more gradations, you can play around with the curves a bit better and be able to get, more detail in the shadows, more details in the highlights.
Right.
The actual range of colors is not really.
I see. Yeah, that's an important distinction. That's why you see less lines basically in the 16-bit image. And this is actually a very good feature for pictures. That's why it can be used for pictures. And 16-bit images, as is mostly everything else in this presentation, they're valid in the PDF specification. Fortunately, they're not very well supported, as we're going to see here. So this is actually an image that I grabbed from the Gantt test suite. Gantt test suite, give it a try if you have some sort of a workflow that involves images or print. It's very, very good. It might show you problems that you didn't even know you had. So the original image here is that yellow, red, whatever other colors in there, and that is a 16-bit image. Which it doesn't have to be in this case, because it's a fairly simple image actually, but it's just there for demonstration purposes. And then on your left side, on your right side actually, you're going to see 3 different interpretations by 3 different very common viewers, which I shall not mention today. And you're going to see that one of them is a black box. The other one is what I first thought is an inverse color of that image, but it is not, because white is still white, and I think black is still black, but everything else is inversed. And then you have a white box over there. So if you're working with a document that has a white background and some sort of a 16-bit image, and you're viewing it with this particular common viewer here, which, mind you, comes pre-installed on a particular operating system, you're not going to actually know that you have an image on that page. So it's not even going to bother notifying you that something's wrong. It just shows the white box on the white background, and that's quite problematic. So there are, of course, things that we can do to avoid those issues. Let's see what those are. Well, use common image formats when you don't have control over the complete process. When you're distributing some files to your users, for example, you don't know what they might use to view your files. Use common image formats. And think here if you would like your users to actually be able to see your images, or if you would like your images to look better. So it's a small trade-off for interoperability here. Make sure your color spaces are appropriate for your audience. As I mentioned, end users are usually going to have to convert your files to RGB anyway, so why not distribute them in RGB to end users to begin with, most of the time. Yeah. And use tools to do those conversions with a fully managed workflow, since if you don't, actually your colors might come out incorrect. So with that, we're going to move on to another favorite topic of mine, if this thing actually works. think we're frozen here. We're completely frozen. I don't actually know what's going on. I think we had a crash. We'll resolve it momentarily. Okay. There. Ah, there we go. Here. Perfect. Thanks, Dietrich. All right, so if you've seen any of my other talks, I talk about transparency pretty frequently, and that is not because I dislike transparency. I actually like transparency. It's very cool. It allows you to do things that you can't do otherwise. It allows you to save up on some file space, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, a lot of the transparency types available out there, which are a lot, are not very well supported by all the different viewers and all the different tools out there, which means that your files that contain transparency might actually look different on different viewers and contribute to some pretty huge interoperability issues. So that's actually a problem, and that's why I commonly advise people that are going to distribute files internally to flatten transparency whenever they have this concern that the transparency might not be processed correctly. And not all files that you know of contain transparency, so some files that you don't think have any transparent regions in them might actually contain transparency, and that happens accidentally sometimes. Some tools will insert transparency when you put shadows on your text. Other tools will just put it there just because. So check your files. It's pretty important. You don't want your files to look bad when your end users see them. So what is actually transparency? I had our marketing team put together a transparent image for me because I honestly don't do graphic design very well. I started off as a software engineer, so naturally me and graphic design don't go way back. So this is what they came up with. We have a window that is actually transparent. We have some sort of a layer that is actually transparent that goes behind it, and then at the end we have that image. That's how we come up with the image on the left. So these three layers can be separate in a PDF file, and they can have a particular type of transparency applied to them. Then it's up to the viewer that's viewing those layers to actually decide how they're going to interact based on the transparency that is defined in the PDF file. So this is where a lot of the problems come from, since not all viewers think that this transparency should actually be presented in exactly the same way. I think we're frozen here again. Oh no, we're not. So I'm going to talk to you about flattening transparency, and this is not only about flattening transparency, but actually how I check files manually for transparency. So this is a window in Acrobat Pro, and that's the flattener preview, and it's going to actually highlight the part of the document that's transparent. So that's actually pretty convenient. If you're wondering if there is any transparency in your document or not, you have one document, you have a copy of Acrobat, just run it through, and it's going to tell you very visually what is transparent in that document, what's not. And I use that to basically troubleshoot files. Whenever a customer file comes in, they're seeing a problem with it, I'll just run it through the flattener and see if there's any transparency in that region or not. So that's a nifty little trick, but you can also use it to flatten transparency again for single files. It's actually pretty convenient. So what does flattening transparency mean? On the left side we have two images, which are actually two separate boxes. One box is overlaid over the other one, and I think this is one of the more basic types of transparency. And basically, the box on top is transparent, and you can see the box on the bottom through it. It's actually pretty neat. After you flatten transparency, though, the tool that you use to flatten transparency will go ahead and actually combine the two images, so you can see that it pretty much bakes one image into the other, and the other image is now separate. So that's something pretty interesting that the flatteners out there do. And of course, there are some upsides and there are some downsides to flattening transparency. So reduce time to process files. We work with a lot of print shops, and a lot of times I hear from them that their presses don't handle transparency quite well. So if you hand them a file with a lot of transparency, they'll pretty much choke. They'll slow down. Even though the results might look fine, it might take actually a little bit to process those files. So if those files are pre-flattened, they're going to process faster through the presses. They also will know what the end result will look like, because we're going to reduce some of the ambiguity. On the downside, flattening actually increases file size. So if we take a look at the previous example, the PDF file that contained the left image was 73K. The PDF file that contained the right image was 396K. So it was quite a bit bigger, but then again, you made the trade-off for reduced ambiguity in that file. So it's really something that's up to you to decide which one you need, and they can both be useful. Files with transparency can be useful. Larger files without transparency can also be useful. And of course, at the end of the day, files that have been flattened are very, very difficult to edit. So once those images are baked in, you can't really undo that. And it's very difficult to actually edit those files. You might also introduce some other problems in there. But again, you're making a trade-off here, file size and ambiguity versus other things. So that's really the trade-off that you have to decide when your files contain transparency. What can go wrong here? So I mentioned that transparency is not universally very well supported. And maybe I didn't pick the best example here, but this is one of the types of transparency. And this is, again, a popular viewer on the left that gets it right, a popular viewer on the right that doesn't get it right. Actually, the popular viewer on the right side thinks that there is a double edge where the images overlap. You're going to see actually right here, one of the edges is darker, the other one is lighter, and that's something that's not supposed to happen. That's the wrong way to do it. Unfortunately, there can be many different interpretations of this exact problem. So a third viewer might actually see it in a different way. A fourth viewer might see it in a different way. So basically, you don't know what you're delivering your end users with something like this. And it's really where the problem with interoperability comes. So when not to flatten, I mentioned the trade-offs a little bit ago. I mentioned that flattening might help you in some cases. When your file size needs to be minimal, you shouldn't really flatten your files. When you have control over the complete workflow, you know your tools can handle transparency very well. You know that you can move that file through all of your tools. They're not going to choke on it. You can use it, and in some cases when 100% exact reproduction is not exactly necessary. So if that double edge over there that happened on the second image, that doesn't matter to you, then go ahead and do it. It's not really a big deal to some companies, and I can certainly understand that. So with that, we're going to wrap up transparency, and we're going to talk a little bit about fonts. Now, Dietrich covered a lot about fonts yesterday. I'm certainly not going to try to match him. I actually just have some issues over here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go over embedded fonts and unembedded fonts actually in some documents. Now, both of those are valid. You can have a document with embedded fonts, that's valid. You can have a document where the fonts are not embedded, that's valid as well. Which is unfortunately the piece here that introduces the interoperability issues. So we're going back to this text from the beginning of this presentation. So this actually I also got from the Ghent test suite. Again, pretty good test suite. Now, so what's really happening here? Well, there could be a couple of different things going on. In situation 1, you have this font that's not embedded in the document, and one of your viewers thinks that it's font A, and font A has a particular font width, which is not correct, and then it can be interpreted by a different viewer that thinks it's font B, and font B has a different font width. And basically, that's what's going to cause your characters to display like that whenever a font is not embedded. This can happen, unfortunately, in other situations. So if you have an embedded font with a particular font width, but you've told the PDF file that you want this font to be showing up with a different font width. So in that case, it's up to the PDF viewer whether it's going to honor whatever the font says, or it's going to honor whatever is in the PDF file. So if one viewer honors basically what's in the font, this is going to happen. If the other viewer honors whatever is in the PDF file, the characters are actually going to align properly. So this is really the big issue here. Perfectly valid PDF files, they're perfectly valid according to the PDF standard, but they're interpreted differently by the different tools out there, which is also a problem. This can also happen whenever your font is actually broken, but I'm not going to go over that since today I've just decided to talk about things that are valid and not broken, since there are a lot of broken things out there. So let's get back to the slide from the beginning of the presentation, actually start wrapping up this talk. So what we have here is our logo was a 16-bit image, which is actually very easy to create. It's very easy to fake also. I did this particular one with Illustrator, I believe, and you can convert an 8-bit image to a 16-bit one. It's really easy to do. You can try it yourselves. And you can open it with different popular viewers out there. I would highly recommend the embedded ones that come with operating systems, and I do mean mobile and desktop ones. You will see a lot of different results with that PDF file. They all different. They look interesting. They look very interesting. So that's really one of the biggest discrepancies out there, and it's one that you can test yourself. The other thing that was happening is the issue with the fonts that I just explained, where we've pretty much used a font, a particular font, and the operating system. A different operating system had a different font with the same name with different font widths, which is why this file appeared like that. And we're also building a test file internally at DataLogix that actually will help you detect a lot of these interoperability issues. So if you're on our mailing list, you can keep an eye out. We should be finishing it at the end of the second quarter of this year. So we're going to send it out, and you can actually use that file to test the things that I was talking about. And with that, I'd like to wrap this up with this part right here, how to avoid costly mistakes in your workflows. Well, first know the shortcomings of your tools. The reality is most tools have shortcomings. That's really not a problem in most cases. You just have to know when your tools are going to create a problem for you. And try to avoid that. It's not really that big of a deal with some tools. If you're taking in a lot of files, screen those files for, again, common areas that you know you don't perform that well. You know, that happens. There are tools out there that can help you screen your files. There are tools out there that can tell you have transparency in this file, you have fonts that are not embedded, you have annotations without appearance streams. There are a lot of tools out there that are really going to help you make a better workflow for yourself. If you're distributing files to end users, which is on the other end of the spectrum, make sure that those files are converted for maximum compatibility, just so you can actually make sure that your end users see what you see and not something else, because you really don't want to be in the situation where you think that you've distributed this great file, everybody's looking at it, looks the exact same across the board, and they don't really see it the way you do, and that's really a problem, and it looks pretty unprofessional. I've seen it with some big organizations out there, and it just doesn't speak great for them. So with that, I want to thank you for attending this talk and open it up to questions.